March 28, 1942. German Naval Headquarters, Saint-Nazaire. Korvettenkapitän Herbert Solar, commander of the 7th U-boat flotilla, reviewed the morning intelligence briefing with confidence born from months of Atlantic success. The report detailed increased British naval activity in the Bay of Biscay and unusual RAF bombing patterns over the French coast the previous evening. An attack on the base would be hazardous and highly improbable, Solar had told his staff the day before. Saint-Nazaire sat 5 miles up the Loire estuary, protected by coastal batteries that could obliterate any approaching fleet. The shallow, treacherous waters made large-scale naval assault impossible. Let the British waste their bombs on concrete U-boat pens. They would learn that destroying a fortress required more than courage. What Solar failed to grasp was that in a nondescript office in Whitehall, a British naval officer named Captain John Hughes Hallett was already proving him wrong. Working alongside Lord Louis Mountbatten at Combined Operations Headquarters, Hughes Hallett was orchestrating one of the most audacious raids in military history. Within hours, British forces would not only penetrate the supposedly impregnable port, but destroy its most vital asset, while simultaneously demonstrating to their new American allies that democratic nations could strike at the heart of Nazi power with devastating precision. The confidence that would prove fatal came from Germany's position in early 1942. Nazi forces seemed unstoppable. The Wehrmacht had driven deep into Russia. U-boats were sinking Allied shipping faster than it could be replaced, 8 million tons already sent to the bottom. France had fallen, giving Germany Atlantic ports from which to threaten Britain's lifeline. Yet Hitler's fortress had a critical vulnerability that British planners had identified with surgical precision. The target was the Normandie dry dock at Saint-Nazaire, the only facility on the Atlantic coast capable of servicing the German battleship Tirpitz. Without this dock, the 50,000-ton behemoth would be trapped in Norwegian fjords, unable to risk Atlantic operations where damage would leave her no refuge for repairs. Vice Admiral Mountbatten's penchant for bold strokes matched perfectly with Churchill, and he led the planning for what became Operation Chariot. The target selection was strategic genius. By destroying one dock, they could neutralize Germany's most powerful surface threat without having to sink the ship itself. The transformation of this strategic insight into operational reality began with Commander Robert Ryder and Lieutenant Colonel Charles Newman. When briefed on the mission parameters in February 1942, Newman studied the intelligence before responding. "A fortress is only impregnable until someone proves otherwise. We'll need violence, speed, and complete surprise." The plan they developed defied military convention. An obsolete destroyer, packed with explosives, would ram the dock gates. Commandos would destroy the dock machinery. Motor launches would provide fire support and extraction. The entire force would penetrate 5 miles up a heavily defended estuary, past positions that German planners considered impenetrable. The centerpiece of the operation was HMS Campbeltown, formerly the USS Buchanan, one of 50 obsolete destroyers transferred to Britain under Roosevelt's Lend-Lease program. This gift from America would deliver Britain's blow against Nazi Germany's naval ambitions. The American connection ran deeper than hardware. Roosevelt's destroyers for bases deal had been controversial in America, with critics calling it an act of war by a neutral nation. Now, one of those destroyers would justify Roosevelt's strategic vision by striking at the heart of Nazi naval power. The transformation of Campbeltown took 10 days at Devonport. Workers removed 2 of her 4 funnels and cut the remaining 2 at angles to resemble a German torpedo boat. They stripped out internal compartments to reduce her draft for the shallow Loire. Most critically, they packed her bow with 4.5 tons of high explosive, hidden within a steel and concrete case. The human transformation was equally dramatic. Number 2 Commando underwent intensive training in demolition techniques at Burnt Island on the Firth of Forth. Royal Engineer Captain Bill Pritchard, who had studied Saint-Nazaire's vulnerabilities in 1940, taught them to identify the precise locations where charges would cause maximum damage. these men weren't just soldiers. They were precision instruments of destruction. March 26, 1942, 1400 hours. The flotilla of 3 destroyers and 18 motor launches departed Falmouth, formed into an arrow-shaped formation, and headed into the Bay of Biscay. Among them sailed 611 men who would redefine the meaning of special operations. The challenges began immediately. At 7 a.m. on March 27th, lookouts spotted U-593 on the surface. Flying German colours, the destroyer Tyndale charged the submarine, which crash-dived after coming under fire. The Germans had been alerted, but critically, they misinterpreted the flotilla's purpose. As night fell on March 27th, the most dangerous phase began. The RAF bombing raid intended as a diversion was hampered by cloud cover. Instead of providing cover, it raised German suspicions. Captain zur See Karl Konrad Mecker, commanding the 22nd Naval Flak Brigade, sensed something unusual about the bombers dropping single bombs rather than full loads. He placed his defences on high alert. At 0030 on March 28th, the flotilla entered the Loire estuary. Campbeltown scraped bottom twice but crawled forward. Flying German colours and using captured recognition signals, they gained precious minutes. German searchlights swept over them, but the Campbeltown silhouette, modified to resemble a German destroyer, bought critical time. Then, at 1:22, the deception shattered. A German searchlight found them and held. Warning shots rang out. Signalman Pike attempted one last bluff, signalling in German that they were being fired upon by friendly forces. For 4 precious minutes, German gunners hesitated. At 1:27, with the dock gates just minutes away, the Germans opened fire with everything they had. The volume of fire was so intense that Lieutenant Commander Stephen Holden Beatty lost 2 helmsmen. Lieutenant Nigel Tirpitz, who had initiated the delayed fuses on the explosives, took the helm himself as German shells tore through Campbeltown's hull. What followed was controlled chaos elevated to art. At 1:34, Campbeltown slammed into the dock gates at 19 knots, her momentum carrying 9 meters of her bow up and over the caisson. The 4.5 tons of hidden explosives were perfectly positioned for maximum destruction. Even before Campbeltown stopped moving, commandos were pouring over her sides. Lieutenant Stuart Chant, already wounded in the arm and leg, led his demolition team toward the pumping station. This was perhaps the most critical target. Without the pumps, the dry dock couldn't function. The commandos moved with choreographed precision through the chaos. Chant's team placed 40 pounds of explosives on the massive pumps, despite Chant suffering additional shrapnel wounds to his knee and both hands. Setting 90-second fuses, they escaped moments before the pump house was reduced to rubble. Simultaneously, other teams achieved the impossible. Major Bill Copland and Lieutenant Corin Purden's team destroyed the north winding house that controlled the dock's inner gates. Within minutes of landing, every primary objective was accomplished. But the motor launches carrying additional commandos faced catastrophe. German defensive fire found the mahogany-hulled vessels and their exposed fuel tanks. Without armour, they burned like torches on the water. Of the 18 motor launches, only 3 would return to England. As dawn broke on March 28th, the surviving commandos faced a terrible reality. With their extraction routes cut off and ammunition running low, they attempted to fight their way through Saint-Nazaire's narrow streets. Vastly outnumbered, they were eventually forced to surrender when their ammunition was exhausted. The Germans, believing they had repelled the raid, allowed curiosity to override caution. By late morning, hundreds of Germans swarmed over the wrecked Campbeltown, searching for souvenirs and intelligence. Senior officers arrived to inspect what they believed was a failed British gesture. Lieutenant Commander Beatty, captured and under interrogation, endured German taunts. A German officer chided him for thinking that ramming a ship into such formidable gates could have lasting effect. Beatty, knowing the delayed action fuses were still counting down, remained silent. At approximately noon on March 28th, sources vary between 10:35 and 12, Campbeltown's 4.5 tons of explosive detonated. The interrogation room shuddered. Beatty smiled and said, "We're not quite as foolish as you think." The explosion was catastrophic. The dry dock gates were obliterated. Between 320 and 400 Germans who had been inspecting the ship or standing nearby were killed instantly. The Normandie dock, the only facility capable of servicing the Tirpitz, was destroyed beyond repair. But Operation Chariot hadn't finished its deadly symphony. At 16:30 on March 30th, delayed action torpedoes fired by MTB-74 detonated at the old entrance to the basin. The first explosion threw German construction workers into panic. When they fled, panicking guards mistook their khaki uniforms for British commandos and opened fire, killing approximately 250 French workers. The paranoia was complete. Germans saw commandos in every shadow, conducted house-to-house searches, and shot civilians in the confusion. The harbour commander closed the port for a week and ordered searches for additional explosives. The psychological impact matched the physical destruction. Adolf Hitler was furious that the British had sailed a flotilla up the Loire unhindered. He immediately sacked Generaloberst Karl Hilpert, Chief of Staff to the Commander-in-Chief West. The raid that German defenders had dismissed as impossible had not only succeeded, but humiliated the Wehrmacht's entire defensive concept. The strategic implications were immediate and far-reaching. Hitler ordered the construction of 15,000 bunkers by May 1943 to defend the Atlantic coast from Norway to Spain. Resources desperately needed on the Eastern Front were diverted to coastal fortifications. The Atlantic Wall, Hitler's fortress Europe, became an obsession that would drain German resources for the remainder of the war. The Channel Islands alone received 1/12 of all steel and concrete used in the Atlantic Wall because of the propaganda value of fortifying British territory. Every ton of concrete poured in response to Operation Chariot was a ton not used for U-boat pens or Eastern Front fortifications. More critically, the raid achieved its primary objective. The battleship Tirpitz never entered the Atlantic. She remained in Norwegian fjords to threaten Allied shipping until destroyed by the RAF on November 12, 1944. The threat that had haunted Churchill's strategic calculations was neutralized by 611 men in obsolete vessels. The human cost was staggering but not unexpected. Of the 611 men who departed Falmouth, 169 were killed and 215 became prisoners of war. Of the Royal Navy's 346 personnel, 105 died. Of the 265 commandos, 64 were killed. Yet the mission's success validated the concept of special operations against seemingly impossible objectives. To recognize their valor, 89 decorations were awarded, including 5 Victoria Crosses, more than any other operation of similar size in World War II. The raid entered British military legend as the greatest raid of all. For America, Operation Chariot carried special significance. The destroyer that accomplished the impossible had been USS Buchanan, transferred under the controversial Lend-Lease program. Critics who called the destroyer transfer an act of war were vindicated, but not as they expected. American industrial production had enabled British valor to strike at Nazi Germany's naval power. The raid occurred just months after Pearl Harbor, when American forces were still reeling from Japanese advances. Seeing British commandos achieve the impossible using American equipment sent a powerful message. The democracies could strike back with ingenuity and determination that totalitarian planning couldn't anticipate. The success at Saint-Nazaire encouraged Mountbatten's combined operations to attempt the larger Dieppe raid in August 1942, which included 50 U.S. Army Rangers, alongside British and Canadian forces. Though Dieppe proved costly, it provided invaluable lessons for the eventual invasion of Normandy. Roosevelt, who had endured criticism for the destroyer deal, saw his strategic vision validated. The bell from HMS Campbeltown, recovered after the raid, was presented to Campbelltown, Pennsylvania, in gratitude for American support through Lend-Lease. The symbolic connection between American industrial might and British operational daring was complete. For the Germans, Saint-Nazaire shattered comfortable assumptions. After the raid, Hitler demanded impossible fortifications, pouring resources into the Atlantic Wall that would ultimately prove futile against Allied invasion. Every commando raid thereafter triggered disproportionate German responses. Hitler's October 1942 commando order, requiring the execution of all captured commandos, was a direct response to Saint-Nazaire and subsequent raids. This war crime only hardened Allied determination and revealed Nazi brutality to the world. Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, appointed to strengthen Atlantic defences in 1943, studied Saint-Nazaire obsessively. Having witnessed Allied capabilities in North Africa, Rommel believed the key to defeating invasion lay in stopping the Allies on the beaches. His defensive improvements, driven by the shock of Saint-Nazaire, would make D-Day costlier, but couldn't prevent its success. The technological innovations pioneered for Operation Chariot influenced special operations globally. The concept of using an explosive-laden ship as a precision weapon, the integration of naval and commando forces, the use of detailed intelligence for surgical strikes, all became templates for modern special operations. The human dimension transcended military impact. 5 commandos escaped capture, making their way south through occupied France with the help of French civilians, eventually reaching neutral Spain. Their journey demonstrated that occupied Europe wasn't the cowed population Nazi propaganda claimed, but a continent waiting for liberation. Winston Churchill exulted over the brilliant and heroic exploit at Saint-Nazaire, declaring that spirits rose throughout the Admiralty. The Royal Navy, stretched to breaking point by the Battle of the Atlantic, had demonstrated it could still strike offensive blows. The raid proved that even when outnumbered and outgunned, Allied forces could achieve strategic effects through superior planning and execution. The dock remained inoperable until 1948, 6 years after its destruction. For the duration of the war, Germany's naval strategic options were constrained by one night's work. No bomber raid achieved such lasting impact with such economy of force. The 611 men who sailed from Falmouth knew most would not return. They went anyway, proving that democracy's greatest weapon wasn't just industrial production, but the voluntary courage of free citizens. Each man who climbed aboard those fragile wooden launches made an individual choice that collectively changed history. Operation Chariot stands as history's lesson in strategic precision. A single obsolete destroyer, 611 brave men, and 2 hours of combat eliminated a strategic asset that constrained German naval operations for the remainder of the war. The raid proved that when free nations unite in purpose, when careful planning meets courageous execution, even the most impregnable fortresses can fall. The greatest raid of all wasn't just a military operation. It was democracy's demonstration that tyranny's fortresses could be breached by the voluntary courage of free citizens. In 2 hours of combat, 611 men changed the strategic balance of the war and proved that when democracy strikes, it strikes with a precision and determination no tyranny can match.